All right, it looks like we're ready to go. My name is Nikki Young. I'm one of the regional consultants, and I'm here with Melissa Strickland. And we also have our colleague Erica Beatty joining us to watch your questions in the chat box. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Melissa to get us started.
Hi there, my name is Melissa Strickland, and I'm the Regional Consultant for the NC K-3 Formative Assessment Process for the Northeast. And welcome to You Just Did It and Continue to Just Do It. I would like to extend a congratulations to nearly every kindergarten teacher across our state for completing the KEA status summaries on time. Great job. Today, we're going to talk about how continuing the formative assessment process in your classroom can benefit every child and fully develop the whole child. I always like to begin by reviewing the definition of formative assessment. Let's just take a minute to read this and reflect on the emphasized words in red. Formative assessment is a process used by teachers and students during instruction that provides feedback to adjust ongoing teaching and learning to help students improve their achievement of intended instructional outcomes. So the first word you'll see highlighted is process. I think it's really important that we keep this in our minds. Formative assessment is not a 1, 2, or even 3-time event where we gather data. It's a process that is ongoing. We gather data in a multitude of ways that provides us with feedback to adjust our teaching strategies as we go forward daily to help students improve their achievement of intended instructional outcomes.
We get the question a lot about why we have a status summary period that ends at the 60th day. And so we just wanted to bring you back to the vision of this K-3 formative assessment process. And you can see in this graphic here that really this process is about observing our students across the primary grades. The KEA is just this small portion that we start out kindergarten with. The process is intended to help us support our students throughout kindergarten and then through 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade. So we have progressions that are specific to kindergarten entry, but we also have progressions that span that K-3 time for our students. On this slide, you can see what those progressions are and how they align in each of the 5 domains of learning. So the K-3 formative assessment process is organized under these 5 domains of learning and development for our children. The kindergarten entry constructs that we're using for that kindergarten entry portion are those that you see in the middle column there. And then the constructs that I mentioned that are appropriate for our children all the way up to grade 3 are in the right-hand column. So as students master some of these kindergarten entry constructs, or maybe not master, but as they are able to demonstrate all the skills on a particular construct, you can use the K-3 constructs to help you continue to support that child's growth. And another thing that we wanted to come back to are the 5 critical components of the formative assessment process. So we use these construct progressions as tools to help us engage in this cyclical process where we're continuing to gather evidence and then interpret that evidence, look at the construct progression and think about when the child does this, what does it tell me about what the child knows and where the child is on the progression. So a lot of kindergarten teachers have been heavily engaged in eliciting evidences of learning, right? That's one of the critical components of the formative assessment process, where we're observing our kids and snapping those pictures, making those anecdotal notes, really gathering that evidence of what they can say, do, make, or write. And then teachers have entered that evidence into the platform and interpreted it by looking at the construct progressions and placing those students somewhere along the construct progression based on what they've demonstrated through the evidence. Then the other things that we want to engage in as we're using the formative assessment process are adapting and responding to learning needs. So making sure that when we observe something, that we use those observations to inform our instruction. We want to select our next learning target. So if we decide that a child is demonstrating skills at level C on a construct progression, then we want to look at what happens on D, on the D skill step. What are the things that we can do to help support the child to achieve that next learning target? And we develop those criteria for success. The criteria for success are exactly those things. When the child does this, I'll know that she has demonstrated something on that next skill step. And then we start all over. And we continue this process to continue supporting our students. One clarification that might be helpful as we're thinking about the status summaries that we just completed is the difference between a learning status and the status summary. So the status summary is that one-time designation that we're making around the 60th day of kindergarten about where students are on kindergarten entry, but the learning statuses are the whatever the current point is on the progression where we observe the child. So we can be making a learning status all the time for children based on the observations that we're making.
Now that everyone has created some learning statuses and status summaries, we have data in our online reports that we can access in the Teaching Strategies platform. When you enter the platform, you currently see 3 tabs at the top as a teacher. It says Assess, Report, and Family. When you click that Report tab, you have 5 available reports, and you'll see the screen looks a lot like you've seen before. Most of you have used the status summary report, especially when you wanted to see those green bars and the 100%, that's where you saw that. Many of you have used the evidence status report to help you keep track of your collected evidences. Those are the 2 reports on the bottom of that screen. But today we're going to be focusing on the top 3 reports on that screen. They are the class profile report, the individual child report, and the development and learning report. So now let's take a peek at each of these reports so you can see how they could assist you as you go forward. The first report we're going to look at is the class profile report. As we take a quick glance, you'll notice that this report, like all of these reports we'll share today, are organized by domains and constructs within each domain. This allows us to be sure we're reaching the whole child, even at a quick glance. This particular report provides information about children's skills within each construct progression. It can be used to assist a teacher with the grouping of children for differentiating instruction. For example, if you take a peek at this report, you'll see here, this is a pretend class that was made up, of course. We don't have real children named Kathy Cow and Spot Leopard, but you'll notice that Kathy Cow and Spot Leopard aren't working on the same learning goals in object counting as Peter Penguin and Snuggly Bear. So of course, as their teacher, I would provide them with different choices that meet their particular needs during math station time and any other activity throughout the day within which object counting can be incorporated. This report can also be used to inform instructional planning in general regarding whole group, small group, and stations. Overall, it provides a picture of where the class is currently along each construct progression. We often create our guided reading groups based on assessment data. This report allows a teacher to create small group opportunities in all domains of learning. Now let's take a look at the individual child report. This report displays dates to let you know when each learning status and/or a status summary was made. It's an excellent report to use to track an individual student's learning and development over a period of time, and this progressional data can be used as supplemental documentation for data discussion meetings such as PLCs and MTSS meetings. Just at a glance, you can easily see the areas that are a student's strength and the area that might be the next area of focus for a student. Again, we want to reach the whole child, so when we look at this report, we want to use it as a guide. We know that your students are all very different, and these reports can be used to assist you in selecting learning targets, or just put more simply, determining which area for which student you'll focus on next. For example, although you can't see it on this particular screenshot, oftentimes the crossing midline construct progression in the health and physical domain is one that students consistently achieve at the highest skill level on the construct progression early on in the kindergarten year. So once a student is consistently displaying this level of skill, there's no need to have the student continue to focus on activities that will help him achieve this skill. You'll notice that if you take a peek at this report, Brenda Bear is at a level C for object counting within the cognitive development domain. It stands out to me that she's remained at this skill level for a month. Using this report, I can see what Brenda's next learning target is. I would focus on this next target skill and allow the construct progression to guide me, which then leads me to the next report, which is the development and learning report. This is a really great report that's individualized for each student. It pinpoints a student's current learning status and the next learning target for each construct. This report is an excellent resource to share with families and let them understand their child's progress and where their child is heading next. So going back to Brenda Bear, in the individual child report, we noted that Brenda was at a level C for object counting. So we know that level D is that next learning target for Brenda. Brenda's progress on this report is concisely stated as Brenda keeps track of objects when counting, not counting them twice or missing any. And next, Brenda will state the last number counted is the total quantity. As a teacher, we know that these are very different skills, and Brenda requires particular instruction and activities to meet her new needs. Something you probably noticed in one of the best aspects of the formative assessment process is that this is all positive, which makes this report in particular easy to share with parents. I strongly encourage you to reach out to a few of your parents in the upcoming months with this report. Give them some ideas of activities to help their child achieve his or her next learning target. I'm sure you'll find that parents are the biggest supporters and will do their best to work with you to achieve that next target.
Melissa just mentioned involving families and parents in supporting students to meet their next learning target. There are a number of other people who might be able to support your students as they are developing in all these domains of learning. In the online platform, you have the option to add other adults in your building as team members. And some ideas for who might be added as team members are the PE teachers, EC teachers. Certainly your teacher assistants would be important to have as team members. All those special area teachers who work with your students, they engage in different kinds of activities with your kids than you do. And having them in the platform with access to the different construct progressions can allow you to have different kinds of evidence that you might just not be able to have if you're limited to what goes on in your own classroom. So it's a really helpful idea to include some of these other folks in your building as people who could gather evidence, who are observing your children anyway, and can help you look at these different areas and think of ways that your students might be supported to reach their next learning goal. Earlier in the webinar, I talked a little bit about the 5 critical components and how we want to continue to use this process. And one thing that I did want to share with you is a resource that we have for teachers called the self-reflection tool. And I'm just going to bring that up briefly so that we can take a look at it. You see on the self-reflection tool that we have the 5 critical components these little pieces of our star logo. And then each of those 5 critical components has a description of practice. So selecting learning targets is that first critical component that you see on this particular tool. And the description of the practice is, I select learning targets with students using the next step along the construct progression. So essentially, when we say selecting learning targets, all we really mean is looking at a construct progression and identifying the next thing that we want the student to be able to do. And then on this particular self-reflection tool, we have columns for in place, partially in place, or not yet in place. These are tools to help you think about what you're doing and how you're using each of these critical components to engage in the formative assessment process. This particular tool is on our statewide wiki, and you can access it and use it to help you get better. The address for our statewide wiki is on this last slide, that NC-K-3 FAP, and that's where you can find that self-reflection tool and a whole lot of other resources about continuing to use the formative assessment process beyond the 60th day. You can certainly contact your district point person or your regional consultant if you have more questions about the material and the information that we've presented today. And also, we have a few minutes now that we can respond to some questions that you may have.
I see one question on here, Nikki, that pertains to team members. Can teachers add team members, or does that have to be done by someone else? Only people with administrator rights. So administrators are able to add team members for teachers, and those would be those other teachers that Nikki had mentioned earlier, your enhancement teachers, your PE, your teacher assistants.
So you just need to make the request to your administrator to add those people for you. Erica, do we have any other questions in the chat box that we might want to discuss as we have everyone still listening?
It looks like that was the really only question that would pertain to everyone, but I did load some handouts like the K3 construct progression book and the K3 at a glance document, as well as the report, how to use that in the platform. So those documents that they may want to download before you in the webinar today, those may be helpful to the participants listening.
Great, thank you for doing that. So those of you who are familiar with that construct progression book for the kindergarten entry progressions might find the K3 progression book particularly useful if you want to keep thinking about the extension of this for our students.
And Nikki, we had a comment that you might want to highlight. Someone put in a question box that you can have those other teachers help you collect evidence even if they're not in the system. So you might want to elaborate a little bit on, even if a teacher is not in the system, how they might, other, I guess, alternative ways that you could have those people collect evidence even if they weren't on the platform.
Thanks for mentioning that, Erica. I can just describe a couple of things that I've seen. One thing that a lot of teachers I've worked with have found particularly useful is just getting a clipboard with a checklist or a list of their students' names, and here's what I'm, here are some of the things I'm looking for with these students. So I've heard teachers say, when I'm thinking about crossing midline, I've given the PE teacher or the art teacher my clipboard and said, if you notice the kids, when they're painting at the easel, if you notice them crossing the midline, could you check it off on this list for us? And I know a lot of kindergarten teachers have found that particularly helpful to just get those extra sets of eyes. And having it paper and pencil form is absolutely fine.
Another way that I've seen is when they have, a teacher might have a grid up over by the teacher's area of the children's names, And as people are working in the classroom, maybe it is an EC teacher working in the classroom or a speech teacher or something like that, they'll jot a note down on a sticky note or something like that, and then stick it right up there next to that child's name. It just provides a place for people to put observations if they don't necessarily have a clipboard and they have sticky notes. I've seen that done as well.
We didn't introduce Amy Scrinzi at the beginning of our webinar, and I'm sorry that I didn't do that, but Amy, one of our project leads, is here with us today too, and I'm glad that she's here to help us answer some of these questions. I think that at this point in the year, we've gotten to know our students, and we have some ways of working with them that are helping them grow. I think anyone we can engage in helping support our students, we should. And so just any way that we can use these tools to gather more information about our kids is going to be valuable. And the platform is a great tool to do that. But I think, any way that we can gather the information, and then as a classroom teacher, we can get back in and use the platform to sort of interpret that evidence and move forward is going to be valuable.
So I see we have a question asking, what are the expectations for collecting data points throughout the rest of the year? And so we don't have any specific set expectation, because like I was talking about earlier, it's all based on each child's progression and where each individual child is. And as the teacher, as the professional, you're looking at this data that you've already collected, and you're going to go forward based on the need for each child in which area you see the need the most. So it may be that for the next month, you might be working with little Brenda, specifically with object counting and perhaps one other area. And as she progresses there might be a need that grows in a separate area that she needs to work on. And that might be the next month or the month after that you're going to really focus with Brenda on what she needs. And you'll collect those data points as you go along. It's what you do every day. Kind of like we had the comment about collecting that anecdotal data. It is what you do every day. There isn't a specific expectation, though, as far as input into the platform.
I know I've heard so many teachers, I know you all have too, so many teachers about, especially around the status summary period when you're reflecting and thinking about where each of your students are. And it's hard to put away, it's hard to put down. If you know that a particular child is on skill B, it's hard to just put that on the shelf and move on. You want that child to progress as far as they can and move to C and move to D and move to E. And that it's become more natural as far as teachers being familiar with what to look for, and then recognizing that these constructs that were selected for KEA are, research-based and identified as some of the key factors in later success in school. And it just makes sense. Teachers will say, it just makes sense to continue focusing on this. I know what to look for, and how could I just stop here? I want them to progress as far as they can.
Absolutely. We're just looking to see if we have any other questions at this point before we wrap it up.
It doesn't appear that we do have more questions now. We hope that this information will help you to continue to support your kids throughout the year.
Thank you so much.
Have a great afternoon.
Bye, everybody.